This is Welsh ASMR 82. Hey, how you doing? This is a video that I've wanted to do for this channel for ages, and you've probably heard of this, thetruesize.com. So it models itself on Google Maps, but what you do is you actually, because of course the Earth is round, despite what some people think, when we use modern maps, because they are flat, it gives a very different look and ratio and size of each country, and for mathematical reasons and maybe socio-economic reasons, countries in the southern hemisphere appear smaller than those in the north. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play around, putting particular countries over others, and we can see how big they are. So I, for example, was just looking at a map of Angola. Angola is a Portuguese-speaking African country in the southern hemisphere. And I think its capital is Luanda. What's the capital name? Luanda, excuse me. And I was thinking, it's an absolutely massive country, but on a map it doesn't look that big. It looks comparative to France. Would you say that's correct? So there's France. And then there's Angola. So maybe it looks a little tiny bit bigger than France. And I'd say it looks about the same size as Egypt. Maybe about the same size as Ukraine or Poland. Maybe a bit bigger than Poland. And then in terms of the states, it's relatively small, I guess. Maybe that much. But what happens is when you move it, particularly the more north it goes, it becomes absolutely massive. So this is because of the shape of the Earth, the way that cartographers have designed the flat maps. So Angola, when we put it over France, is considerably larger. France, Poland or Ukraine. And if you put it over Sweden, it gets even larger. It's the further north it goes. So when you look at Greenland, so what's happening here is because in the north it gets a bit stretched. So it's true to say that the opposite would happen. So for example, Greenland. Okay, so obviously Greenland looks absolutely enormous. So you'd think, okay, well, it's like on par with, maybe half of Russia, a third of Russia, most of Africa, I would say, definitely more than Australia, more than the United States, about the same as Canada, excluding this part up here, and much bigger than Brazil, correct? Okay, so the population size 800. So when we move it, it shrinks dramatically. So now it's about no, I think it's a quarter the size of Canada. Watch what happens when we bring it further down. So I'd say again about a third, maybe a quarter of the United States. I'd say that maybe the same size as Mexico. Just a tiny bit bigger. Maybe if you cut that bit off and stick it there, the same size as Algeria. Brazil, yeah, it's about a quarter the size of Brazil. It's remarkable, really. And I love finding the sort of most random countries and making them move around. Yeah, Australia. Let me do the same with Australia, because Australia is humongous. Australia. Okay, you can really have fun with Australia because it's down here by itself as a continent in a country. And you think, okay, well, it's the biggest island in the world, but how big is it? So, yeah, it's quite a considerable amount of Africa. Brazil's a bit bigger, but watch what happens when we take it more northernly. So, now I'm not suggesting that Australia is bigger in real life. What I'm suggesting is that the sizes are both incorrect. So in the south they should be bigger, and in the north they should be smaller. So it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. So then, I double-clicked it by accident. What have I done? Oh, I can change this colour. How cool! So it's nearly as big as Canada, they would say, twice the size of Greenland, most of Europe. So the closer you get to the equator, that's the more correct size. So as you can see, it's a bit larger than it is on the flat map, but not as stretched as it would be there. I think the biggest test is Russia. As the largest country in the world, it's unquestionably still going to be the largest country in the world. However, when you bring it down, it's not as impressive as it looks. So this is suggesting that Africa is both equally bigger than you think and smaller than you think, because it's bigger than it is on a map, but only because these are stretched. Yeah, so Russia kind of spans North and Western Africa as well as the Middle East. But when we put it down by Australia, it's surprising, really. And Brazil. So it's about the size of South America, I'd say. If you could spin it around, which I can't. So I think the game is, you put that there, and then you bring another one in, so we'll bring in the USA. Oh, it's giving me Cuba. Sorry. United Kingdom, United States. Let's do the full United States, including Alaska. Okay, so that gives you a sense of scale, true scale. Let's do Australia. Let's bring back Australia. So Australia's now here. So Australia, almost as big, pretty comparative with the main part. There's a word for it, isn't it? Contiguous, was it? United States, not including Alaska and Hawaii. And I can't see Puerto Rico there. Is it included? And let's do Brazil. So Brazil, comparative. And I think this is where we should bring in China. Because again, it's comparative. So when people think size of countries, particularly based on their population. China being 1 billion people, Russia being, 150 million, something like that. United States, what's that, it's a couple of 100 million, right? Whereas Australia's got much, much fewer. Like, is it even 40 million? I don't even know if it would be. Brazil's got a couple of 100 million. If we're talking about population sizes, then India has to get involved with 1.2 billion, but relatively small compared to the others. And although it's got a small population, Canada is in this stretched northern section, but if you bring it down, it is still larger than India, Australia, and probably China as well. It's getting a bit busy, shall I take some away? So that's the USA, it's Russia, it's Canada, Brazil, China. So you can see that comparatively they're very similar. It's really fun though when you get to places like New Zealand, which are very southerly, and then you move them around. So New Zealand, you think, small country, it's about, yeah, it's smaller than Somalia actually, maybe just a bit like most of Oman and Yemen together, but not quite. But if you do the fun game of moving it north, then we're talking about a country as long as Sweden, Finland, actually much larger than Finland, longer, I mean, and Norway. Greenland is so out of scale. Mongolia is an interesting one, actually. Mongolia. So when you move it down, it's actually, yeah, it's bigger than Nigeria, but nowhere near as big as Australia. Much larger than New Zealand. Indonesia's an interesting one too. Indonesia. So being on the equator, it's, quite scale-wise very good. Population obviously massive. Oh no, what? Maybe that has nothing to do with the largest archipelagic state in the world by area and population. The largest island country in the world. The largest island country in the world. How strange, what a weird term. So we're talking about, the size of Kazakhstan. Yeah, it's very, as you can see, problematic, I think is the word we're looking for. Let's do Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, when you move it up north, huge, but actually, comparative to India, that's its true size. Let's compare it with South America. So we're talking about the northern part of Brazil, or maybe Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador. In the States, it would take up most of the Midwest. All of the Midwest, in fact. Canada, quite a few of the territories. But when you bring it down, it starts to get bigger again, the further away from the pole it gets. So larger than South Africa. Argentina's a curious one. Let's move that around. So I'm expecting this one to shrink. Only slightly. So it's still a very long country, but if we put it in the position of, say, Norway, it's as big as Greenland. Yeah, that's quite impressive. If you put it in the United States, it takes up a considerable amount of space. So let's do this the opposite way then. So let's take Norway, which has... oh, digging Svalbard as well. So it undoubtedly has a very long coast. I think the second longest, if you include all of the space in the fjords, the second longest coastline in the world of any country. But when you move it down, that's its true size. So it's only about same as Somalia maybe, and considerably smaller than Argentina. Tiny compared to Australia and Indonesia, Malaysia. About the same size as Thailand, maybe. Yeah, similar size to Thailand. About the same size as Japan. But if you consider that Norway has a population of about, I don't know, just a couple of million, something like between 3 and 5 million. Japan has got something ridiculous, like it's over 100 million, isn't it? Another country that is very large is Algeria. So if you move that around, it's very close to the equator, so it doesn't change much in its size here. It's about just under half of Australia. It's nearly as big as India, Kazakhstan, all of Eastern Europe, and a bit of Western Europe as well. And obviously it gets very silly when you start moving up here. I suppose Iceland is the true test, because being so north, it's going to shrink terribly. Oh look, so small. So Iceland around the size of, what's that, Equatorial Guinea, Uganda, half the size of Zimbabwe, a quarter of Madagascar, half of Yemen. It's actually smaller than Ecuador, about the same size as Suriname. Yeah, about the same size. No, a bit smaller than Uruguay. Cuba is actually bigger than it, but on a map it looks much larger. Which is kind of the point of this whole video. Which I hope you enjoyed, incidentally. If you did, then give me a like, drop me a comment. If you can explain why it changes a bit more than me. I'll maybe read this out really quickly. It's hard to represent our spherical world on a flat piece of paper. Cartographers use something called a projection to morph the globe into a 2D map. Every map projection introduces distortion and has its own set of problems. One of the most common criticisms of the Mercator map is that it exaggerates the size of countries near the poles, while downplaying the size of those near the equator. On the Mercator projection, Greenland appears to be roughly the same size as Africa. In reality, Greenland is 0.8 million square miles and Africa is 11.6 million, nearly 14.5 times larger. So why don't you try out this, thetruesize.com. for yourself. It's quite fun. I'll leave another video here for you. Subscribe is up here. Click like down here and drop me a comment. And I'll see you guys really soon. Okay? Take care. Good night.